Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 837. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. The SPaMCAST crew are off on an adventure. We'll be back on December 8th with new content. In the interim, we share 4 gems from our back catalog of over 800 interviews, essays, and conversations. You can check out the entire catalog at www.spamcast.net. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 837, we return to August 2019 for a 2-parter with Al Shalloway. This was a long interview. We originally spread it over SPaMCAST 559 and 560. Today, both parts are united. The conversation with Al was full of huge ideas, concepts, and calls for action. Al and I talked about the troubles dogging classic Agile, the Agile Industrial Complex, using a scientific approach to change and flex. Are you ready for the conversation with Al? It's time for the interview. Al Shalloway, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Well, thanks for having me be here.
Al, it is, I generally don't have the same guest back in a year, but there's been a lot of things that you've been doing lately, and you sort of foreshadowed it earlier when we did the last interview, and it was like, oh, I wish, but I can't wait. So let's start Agile today with, let's say, the Agile Industrial Complex. Aren't we living in an echo chamber?
Yeah, I think we are. I think that you have people who are really interested more in certification than they are in what's really working, and that the people who are doing the certifying don't really want to talk about it, and the people who are wanting to be certified don't want to talk about it. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are wanting to talk about it, but we're not getting any feedback. And it to me, it's getting worse in some ways, because it used to be before, more or less, well, you're doing something really good. And actually, if you look at it, things like Scrum have had an incredible impact on the world, a positive impact on the world. And, has moved Agile from beyond, a few teams working together to thousands, millions. I don't know how many people, but a lot. And I would say, even though I'm no longer a gold partner or associated with SAFE at all, they did a lot of good stuff in the sense that they brought an awful lot of awareness to the fact that you have to look at the whole thing. You have to look at the enterprise. You have to look at how you're developing as an enterprise or an organization. You have to have some consistency on things. And I think these have all moved us forward so much that it's been good, but it's turned into, I don't know how to say this, because I like businesses. I'm a capitalist. I like business. I think making money is good. But it used to feel like it was like we were doing stuff to make things better. And now it seems like we're doing stuff to sell more certification. So I think the Agile Industrial Complex is kind of a right term, and nobody wants to challenge it. And if you do, like, I've been called bashing any number of times, and I'll admit, my tone sometimes is bad. I get frustrated, and, I usually apologize after I do something like that. But I think there's some like insane stuff out there that if you do point it out, you get this negative sense. And to me, when there's something that's just blatantly wrong, and there's a lot of stuff out there in Scrum and say that it's just blatantly wrong. I mean, I'll give you an example, because it's not an opinion. It's like, everybody loves Don Reinertson. In fact, I'm one of Don's biggest fans. I love Don Reinertson, and I joke that when he and I disagree, I know who's going to learn something, because we disagree a lot, but I always come around to his way of thinking, because he's just smart. He's just figured this stuff out. And this concept he calls cost of delay is incredibly useful. What is the cost of delay of not getting something done? So if a product's going to give you $100,000 a month and you get delayed by 3 months, or it takes you 3 months to build it, the cost of delay was $300,000, 3 times 100,000. And cost of delay is great. And SAFE has done a lot of good by using weighted shortest job first, talking about cost of delay. And there are actually 2 or 3 what I would call kind of errors or things they could do better. But they do cost of delay on 2 things that absolutely does not make sense if you're talking about cost of delay. And yet, I've mentioned this any number of times, and nobody seems to want to talk about it. And what that is if you have a feature, for example, and they do cost of delay on features, WSJF on features. in the program increment. If you have a feature and that feature is not going to be deliverable to a customer because you need 2 or 3 of the features for it to provide value to the customer, then calculating costs of delay on a feature like that makes 0 sense, because you can't calculate the cost of delay on that, because it's the cost of delay of the whole group of features you need, not the one feature. Or if you've got an epic, you can't calculate cost of delay on epics either, because you're going to only implement part of the epic. You should be calculating cost of delay on the part of the epic. And this concept of what you calculate costs of delay on is actually not in SAFe, which is kind of bizarre, if you ask me, or it's implied, but it's not really there. It's a right-sized epic, I called it once. It's not an MVP, because an MVP is when you're investing in getting information about whether you have a product, not that you're investing because you expect to get a return because you're extending an existing product. So there's some real insane stuff in the industry that nobody wants to talk about, at least not the people who are promoting it. And a lot of not the people who are wanting to bring it into their company. And a lot of things are more complicated because of this. And I think it's a reflection of Upton Sinclair's comment. It's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. So I think that's what's causing the echo chamber. And there's a lot of stuff that, if you really sit down and analyze, is nonsensical.
Part of the problem that I've seen is that almost every term now, whether it's MVP or heck, even cost of delay, has like at least a half a dozen different definitions. And because of that, you can have a conversation, get people's heads to nod up and down, and the answer is you both walk away, or multiple people walk away, with different understandings of what was said.
Yeah.
There's no source of truth.
Yeah, well, I think the AIC is doing that too. I mean, again, I don't want to be picking on SAFe here, but, well, I don't know, maybe they deserve it. But you look at, they took Eric Ries's, and I love Eric Ries. I joke, but it's true, actually. The thing I dislike about Eric is the fact that he can explain things better than me. And actually, I think he's better looking too. I hate to say that.
I've met him. I'm not sure. No.
It's like, otherwise the guy's brilliant. I mean, the guy's amazing. And an MVP to Eric is not just about validating an hypothesis. I mean, that's not a new concept. We've had that in Agile since day one. I mean, the Agile Manifesto talks about that directly. And even before that, we knew that's what we had to do. That's why we did things incrementally and iteratively. We wanted validation. So the MVP by Eric in the Lean Startup is about, I'm building the minimum viable product to test my hypothesis of whether I have a product or not. And in fact, I want that to fail some of the time, because then I'm learning things. And by the way, Eric redefined MVP from Frank Robinson from 2001, where it actually meant, what's the smallest product I could put out there that I can make money on? His MVP, Robinson's MVP, was like what actually Denny and Cleveland Wang's minimum marketable feature was. And then, of course, SAFe took MMF and threw it into the UX, Lean UX, which it's not in the Lean UX book. And he used it as, again, just a special way of validation. So, yeah, I've been saying that if you've got 2 definitions for something, you've got any number of definitions. So redefining things. I mean, this is where we've gotten to. Now what people do, if you've got a marketing organization and you've got a brand, you buy somebody else's stuff, or you just take somebody else who's a reasonable expert, have them write a course for you, and then throw it into your pile and now market it. But you don't get a cohesive system doing that. And you're causing damage now because nobody knows what an MMF is. Even features can be defined any number of different ways. And which is ironic, because people are buying these things so they can get consistency. And yet these things are causing inconsistency. So it's kind of frustrating. And part of what I think is missing here is these are all kind of experts, quote unquote, opinions, who then become authorities. And I think this is something worth looking at. So let me give an example from science. So in the scientific community, I think it's safe to say that Einstein was an expert on physics. But you know what? He was not an authority on physics. In other words, just because Einstein said it didn't mean it was right. Now, of course, he's smart enough where if he said it, you better listen to him. Same way with Don Reinertsen. Don is such an expert that if he says something, I'm going to really consider it. But I'm not going to believe it. He's not an authority on flow. He isn't the one who gets to say whether this works or not. He gets to say what he thinks works. And like I say, you probably ought to pay attention to that. I mean, I remember reading a section in his book years ago where he's describing how people think you can mandate certain rules from the top about flow, and that if product A is more important than product B, then you can have product A be guided through the system always before B. And I was actually doing that at the time when I read this. And I say, oh, Don's writing about me here because he's describing exactly what I'm doing, but he's saying it's not a good thing. I was pretty sure I was doing the right thing, but Don is an expert. And because of that, I thought, well, maybe I ought to consider why he's saying what he's saying. And after a while, I realized what he meant is, yeah, A is more important than B, perhaps, but in a local decision, as I'm making a local choice and I'm the one who's down in the work, if I can do B before A where it won't affect A adversely, then I can do that. This is part of pushing things down, is you have to create this high level view of things so you can make local decisions. You have the high level view create a context for the low level decisions. It doesn't make the decisions for the low level. And I realized, oh, okay, yeah, Don is not an authority, so I didn't believe him, but he is an expert, so I listened to him. And then I figured it out. And then by using evidence from my own experience, I proved he was right. And I ended up learning something. That's something that's woefully missing in the Agile community. People have put the leaders of the, like SAFe and LESS and Scrum and XP to a lesser extent, because they haven't taken the mantle of being authorities. They've taken the mantle of what works. So XP, to me, always has a certain high reverence, because I think they were just interested in what worked, and they had opinions and are passionate and all that. But you could talk to them about why it worked. So I would say there are no authorities there other than like what they did, but not what actually works. You can talk to them. So this notion of that what we need is experts, not authoritarians, is important. And if you have experts and not authoritarians, that leads you to the question of, well, then what is an approach, or what is a brand? And I think an approach now is saying, well, what we need is a scientific approach. Is it working? And this is actually what the core of some of the lean management and Kanban stuff, which is that you put forth your process as an explicit explanation of what you're doing. And you say, this is the best thing I think that works. So you have a team that has an explicit workflow, and they're saying that this is the best way we know how. And when it's pointed out there's a better way by the team or somebody else and the team accepts, then they change it. And I'm suggesting that what we need is to say that, okay, I'm putting forth a process. In fact, this is what I'm doing with Flex, Flow for Enterprise Transformation. I'm suggesting that Flex is my hypothesis of the best way to do things. Now, I may be an authority on what I put into Flex because I own it. I may be an authority on how I brand Flex. I may be an authority on who I would certify in Flex, but I'm not an authority on if it is in fact the best hypothesis or not. I'm just an expert in this area, and there are a lot of other experts. And I am actually asking for people. I know this sounds weird, but this is how I've learned over the last forever, actually. This is how I think pretty much I've learned since I got into college. Is I'm a request to tell me what's wrong with Flex. It's kind of, I forget his first name. Neil deGrasse Tyson is just, I love some of his things. And one of the things that I've never heard him actually say this. So I'm kind of paraphrasing what somebody told me he said, which is that religion, resists being questioned. It can't tolerate being questioned because it's just how it is. But science is actually a request for being questioned, because that's how you learn. Is that in science you're making hypotheses, and if you're wrong, you want to know you're wrong, which is I just think really cool. Here's I got to put this quote in because this is one of the best quotes. When I was looking for Neil deGrasse Tyson's quote on what I just said about how religion doesn't want to be questioned, then science actually is a request for it. I came across this other great quote, and maybe this is irrelevant to this conversation, but it's such a great quote, I want to read it. He says, "For me, I am driven by two main philosophies. Know more today about the world than I knew yesterday, and lessen the suffering of others. You'd be surprised how far that gets you." And I just love that. I actually think that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to learn more and more and more. How can we do our job better So we take away the suffering and, dare I say it, have joy in our work. And I think that a lot of why we suffer is we're just doing wrong stuff because we're not being scientists about it. We do crazy things and we believe insane things, and we don't have to. We, from our own experience, can discern a lot of things, but it's just not how the industry's been going. And I think actually now the AIC is working against us in this.
If we went down the path of taking a scientific approach and using observation, data, feedback loops the right way, in essence, to challenge hypothesis, would that deal with some of the, or maybe all of the causes of dark Agile, dark Scrum at this point?
Yeah, I totally believe so. In fact, I know so because this is what I've been doing. But before I talk about like how I've been doing it or what I've been doing, let's forget it, Flex. I mean, I mentioned Flex, so I would say yes because I have evidence. But let's not talk about anything that I have control over. So let's just talk about what are the big problems. So when I look at the Agile community and what's going on, I would suggest that there are 6 major challenges that are present and that have caused a variety of issues. And let me set the stage for a little bit of this and how I mean this before I mention these 6 things. And then I will go through these. Like I wrote a blog a couple days ago, maybe yesterday, causes of dark Scrum, but you could do Agile too. And whenever I hear why Scrum doesn't work, I hear 2 things almost all the time. One of these 2 things is that management's not involved or people lack motivation. Well, it would work if people were motivated. It would work if management bought in. And I think that's BS. I just really do. I'm not saying that people are always bought in. I'm not saying management's always bought in, but I don't think that's the real issue. And I listed a bunch of other things, that sometimes forming cross-functional teams is difficult, but you're supposed to, well, that's it, what you do, and there's no guidance, technical skills are pretty much ignored. You're not educating management, but just telling them, calling them chickens. It's like there's, no transition model. I mean, there are whole bunches of things. And in fact, I think having the attitude that if Scrum doesn't work, it's a result of management not getting involved or that people lack motivation is the real reason. I think that's the biggest reason, is because if you can say as a Scrum trainer or creator of Scrum that, well, it's not my fault, it's those people are doing what they're doing, then you don't really look at the deep issues like why are they doing what they're doing. One thing I've learned with lean and lean management and systems thinking is people respond to the system they're in. So people are in a system that has them not be motivated. Okay, great. How do you get them out of that? If you have an approach that only works when they're not in lack of motivation or, they're not involved, then your system is going to work in 10, 20%. Hey, those early adopters are already gone. They're already doing Agile. They're probably doing it real well. So I'm more interested in how do you fix a system to get you out of that? And how do you do that? And that I think that a lot of things like Scrum Butt and Dark Scrum are not the cause of Scrum failing. They're symptoms of Scrum failing. There's something deeper going in this. So let me tell you the 6 things. So, I mean, I'm not saying these are these 6, but these are 6 that I hear often mentioned as, well, we can't do these. We can't do these 6. It's just not possible. And again, I'm not the expert on, well, I am an expert, I think, on how to do it because I've actually solved all 6 of these. But I'm not the authority on how to do it. In other words, I've got my way. There are other people, very, very smart people who are very capable and get stuff done and are solving these problems, at least to a large extent. So let me go through them because I think this is really the meat of the matter and how to get to where we're going next in the community. And the first one to me is something I've harped on for a very long time, is that you need a well-defined but customized starting point. And the reason you need this is, and notice, by the way, Scrum doesn't do this. Scrum says you need to have teams, cross-functional teams. You need to use sprints. You need to have these roles. That's not tailored. That's what you do to start. And I know Scrum is really a meta process and you're supposed to figure things out, but there are these preconceived notions. And problem is no one size fits all. And the thing is I believe we know enough now that with a little bit of analysis, a couple of days of work, you go into an organization. I'm not talking about a 10,000 person organization, but 500 people or less. And most even 10,000 people organizations are composed of smaller ones. And you figure out, well, what would work for these people? What kind of team structure? What kind of inter-team structure? What kind of planning should they do? And then an expert says, here, this is what you do based on this toolbox that we've accumulated. And you could solve this problem this way. And actually, this is kind of our approach when we do Flex, is it's you tailor it that way, but you're using well-known practices. Or what about this? With complexity, everybody's talking about complex systems, you can't make predictions. And I say, no, that's ridiculous. You can't make totally accurate predictions, but there's both macro and micro predictions. Like micro predictability, I learned this from Don. Micro predictability is like you go to a roulette table, is it going to go red, green, or black? And you don't know. But is more money staying at the table? Or in particular, am I going to lose my money? Yes. I can make macro predictions. And because you never know for a fact, then you always use feedback. So you can make reasonably intelligent guesses that are pretty accurate. Like I went down to New Zealand. I can tell you right now, driving on the left side of the road in New Zealand is a lot smarter than driving on the right side of the road. And driving is a complex system, but go against the laws, go against the rules, you got troubles. So this whole complexity thing is a red herring to me. And we've given up our strength on it. What about providing options to adopters to avoid reinventing the wheel? Scrum takes pride in the fact that it's simple. And I'm wondering why? And pride in the fact that it's generic and worked everywhere. I said, yeah, that's great. But you know what? I'm building software. Tell me how to build software with Scrum. Why do I have to reinvent? I've been saying this for like 15 years. If I see every Scrum team do the same thing wrong, why do I not tell them? Oh, well, wait a minute. You got to let them decide. Don't give them an answer. I said, wait a moment. That'll just frustrate them. Why don't I explain to them why starting few things will have some advantage and not have some advantage, and try it as an experiment to see what works for them? Why have them reinvent the wheel? And people say, well, then you're going to have too complicated. No system could handle everything. It doesn't have to handle everything. It just has to handle 80% will be an improvement. And if you can't figure out how to architect your framework so it can handle that, then I think you're just shouldn't have a framework. Don't propose something that doesn't have an architecture to it. That's an interesting statement. What I just said there, I've been looking at this and saying, well, this is funny. Flex is really architected to be able to add things to it, to be able to grow, to be clear to understand. It's like a toolbox where the top shelf is your simple tools, and then you've got drawers underneath it when you need to get to them. That doesn't add complexity. That's just intelligent architecture. Why are we not talking about how framework should be architected? But I've never heard people talk. Well, I think I've heard a couple of people talk about it, but not anybody in the AIC talks about that.
Why is that such a hard thing to talk about?
Well, why is it a hard thing to talk about? It is because it's complicated. So I think maybe that's it. So here's the thing. If I'm going to a client, I am not going to talk to him about why Flex is architected the way it is and why it's so wonderful and robust and I can do all sorts of things, because they don't care. That's like talking to somebody about the fuel injectors in my car. I could care less about the fuel injectors in my car. I want to know the gas mileage, it's not pollutant, etc. So talking to practitioners about it makes no sense. You'll complicate things. But why is it in the community we don't talk about it? Well, the reason is, in my opinion, is that most people, like the people who've created Scrum and extend it and now do Scrum at Scale and Nexus and Less and all that, I believe actually the foundation of Scrum and the philosophy underneath Scrum of it being totally an empirical process is flawed, but they don't want to talk about that either. And I'll give you an example. Ken talks about that he uses empiricism because he talked to the chemists and they said the only way to control a process is through empirical feedback. And once you've got it set up, that makes a lot of sense. But these chemists had a lot of ideas about how chemicals come together. And there's a model under their empirical process, but Ken kind of forgot that. To me, that model is lean and flow. And so if you just use empiricism and just go in and try different things, it's going to be really complicated. And if that's where you're coming from, you don't want to talk about it because you look stupid, because it's actually you're in over your head with things are complicated more so than is being understood. And I think a lot of this is due to stuff like that. I'll give a quick example that happened to me. Helpful. 74, so a long time ago. I was taking organic chemistry in the summer, 2 classes. Organic 1, where you basically learn all what a peptide is and what this is, and all the different rules and little molecules and things. And man, this was tough. I up to that point had never really studied in my life, and I was working my tail off. And I did get an A, But I mean, I was studying like 4 to 6 hours a day for this stupid class. And I'd heard that the second class was tougher than the first one. I'm excuse my language, I'm shitting in my pants. I mean, I've never studied before, and I'm working 4 to 6 hours a night studying on this. And I got an A, but barely, it was hard work. And the next one is tougher. Well, actually, the next one I breezed through. It was one of the, I won't say easiest classes, but I would say at a moderate, and I got an A plus. And what was the difference? The difference was that in the first class, you had to remember like 100, 200 things of how the different parts of a molecule were. And I'm not very good at that kind of thing. The second one was how they combined. Now, if you think about it, if I've got a couple hundred things, and now I have to figure out how do a couple hundred things combine, of course that looks tougher. But that's only if you, in fact, you look at a couple hundred relations to another couple hundred relations, which is how most of the people in the class did. I tend to think a different way. I tend to think more abstractly, more scientifically. And there are 3 rules. One rule is negative doesn't like negative, positive doesn't like positive, and negative likes positive. And you can also say positive likes negative. So 4 rules, that's it. And I can still remember having these little models, and they'd say, if this peptide comes to that thing, what happens? And I would notice that this has got a positive force here and a negative force there, and this has got 2 positives there. So how are they going to come together? And by using that model, I could figure out what would happen. And it was easy. It was just 4 rules, not 200 to 200. Now, what I think we need to do in this industry is to start paying attention to those rules. You don't have to explain them to the practitioners. They're like, that's not how they think. But if you're not building systems based on the science of flow and lean, then you're driving on the right side, or by right, I mean right versus left. You're driving on the right versus left side of the road in New Zealand, and that's a dumb thing to be doing. And you can complain about it, like, oh, it's so hard to do. Or you could say, why is it so hard to do? And people don't like to question that. Again, I'll bring up Upton Sinclair. It's hard to convince a man of something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. This is where certification is killing us. I mean, you think about this for a minute. You spend a week learning how to be a safe program consultant, then you discover there's a better way to do it. Well, now you're not an SPC anymore. I mean, are you doing stuff outside of your training? Scrum says if you improve Scrum, well, if it's not an improvement, but you change it, you're doing Scrum butt, and woe to you. And if you have an idea that might be an improvement, well, you were certified in Scrum, and now you're saying go outside of Scrum, you're no longer an expert. So the whole AIC is set up in this, and I think it's insane to limit our thinking. And everybody says, well, it doesn't have to limit your thinking. It's just a tool and all that. But no, you look at what it does, and people refer to the Scrum Guide as the Bible because they don't have anything else to base it on, because Ken has thrown away the model that's underneath what the empirical process control is running on top of. That's not scientific. That's dogma. I'm sorry. It's just dogma.
If an architecture exists, if it's exposed, does that not then also, I mean, to the point, doesn't that allow it to grow and evolve and therefore not stay? Well, and if it rapidly evolves, then it's very hard to certify. So we get into sort of that catch-22 cycle.
That's right. Well, see, this is something I learned also from Don Reinertson a long time ago when we set up the Lean Software and Systems Consortium, which was that certification. You can certify abilities, but certifying knowledge doesn't make any sense really. And that what you want to certify in is the approach you're taking. So this is, again, where with Flex as an architecture, what I looked at in trying to solve this, I said, well, first of all, you want to go around the value stream, because the value stream is really from where you get your ideas. It goes through a variety of steps. And even though the steps seem similar to waterfall when I describe them, it all has to do with the size and the feedback and things like that. But at some point you have strategies. What's the company up to? What are your initiatives? What are your business increments? The product management of things you're going to get done. How do you have a discovery intake process to know what to do? How do you do a development intake process to take it in? How do you plan it? How do you do it? How do you teams coordinate with each other? How do you release it through ops, DevOps, good? How do you realize the value of the customer? How do you then see if the customers are actually using it? Do a plan, do study, adjust to see how the whole thing worked, and then start over, except do it in little bits, little cycles, always getting feedback. But if you listen to how I discussed that, I've got about 10 things now And if I do it in the value stream, what I've got is like, if I have strategies, well, I've got strategies in the context of what I'm trying to do for the customer. If I create initiatives, I'm doing that in the context of the strategies. If I look at the business increments I'm trying to build, I'm going to do that in the context of what I'm building for my customers through the initiatives. If I'm doing agile and know I need quick feedback, I'm going to look for this thing we call minimum business increments. What's the thing I can deliver the fastest? If I'm going to now take that into the development team, it's how do I pick the most important things that I have capacity for in the development team? Now, notice I'm creating an architecture, a structure, these components, each of which feeds the next, each of which is in the context of the one before it and after it. So if I want to say, well, which one's going to work? I can use things like, okay, well, I'm getting this information. I'm saying this is the best way to work. And now I have to look, well, how does it affect the upstream? How does it affect the downstream? Are there side relationships? And I'm dealing with complexity. I'm not overwhelmed by complexity because I have a few relationships I have to look at. I can make actually some pretty good predictions. And I know I'm never right, because even if I'm making a good prediction, there are people involved, and people sometimes do the damnedest thing. Somebody might actually see it's a good idea, but he'll end up with fewer people, and his pay is based on how many people are under him. Somebody just may not like you for some reason. I can understand why they might not like me, but Tom, you're a nice guy. I don't understand that. So you might make a suggestion, and somebody might just not want to do it just to be right or to be arrogant or to whatever, because you reminded them of a bully they had when they're in the 6th grade. I mean, I know this sounds crazy, but you notice if there's not a lot of truth to this. So when you're talking about the laws of development, what should work, there is drive on the left side of the road in New Zealand, absolutely. But no, that's no guarantee. So you still have to look in your rearview mirror, you look on the sides, you look ahead, you pay attention. But now you're kind of having to be like, oh, there's not a set solution. We like to be in control. We like to think if we adopt something, we're in control. And that's uncomfortable. So what I think is there's this responsibility for people like myself and others who are creating approaches to be scientific about it and to provide some level of certainty that's tailored to people. And I think it takes a higher bar to do this. You shouldn't just be collecting practices from places and throwing them together. Yet that's what we have. And I'm hoping to change this. And I know a lot of other people are hoping to change this. This is actually what we started the True North Consortium, LinkedIn user group and community about, is there are a bunch of people out there who are really smart, who are saying, hey guys, look, let's look at what works and let's stop the marketing. I mean, you can market your stuff. We like making money. But let's do it on the basis of what truly works. Anyway, comment on what I said, but I still got 3 more. I'll try to go through them quicker because I know I've been really going into these, and I think they are actually faster. In fact, I actually answered one of them. I just noticed this. I actually answered 2 of these already. One was to be able to expand an approach without adding complexity. When you have the value stream and you have these components and you look at how they are, and you know, be careful here. I want to explicitly point this out. Systems are not the collection of components. It's about the relationships between the components. You could take the best components from 20 cars, try to put them together. They won't work because they're from different cars. A car is a system of things working together. Your approach has to be a system of things working together. But if you change one thing, you look for the relationships. You want to set it up so you can look at the whole and see if it's an improvement. We need a simple model for agile product management that works at all levels. And I have been saying something for years and years and years. And every customer that I've worked with, they start accepting this and talking about it and getting excited about it. And it's a simple concept. And it didn't originate with us. It actually originated with Frank Robinson when he called it an MVP, with Denny and Cleland Wang when they called it a minimum marketable feature. And then we changed the name to minimum business increment. But the reason we changed the name was because when we would use MMF, minimum marketable feature, people say, oh, well, we're in IT, we don't have features, or we don't market. So we realized, well, you really are got a focus on business increments. So what's the smallest business increment you can get out the door? So for basically the last 10 years, that name's worked well. That is a simple model for agile product management. That's what you should be doing, weighted shortest job first on. And SAFe doesn't have this concept in it. MVP isn't it. MVP is how do you make an investment for whether or not a product's good, not how do you make an investment because I'm expecting money back because I already know it's a good product. And then the last thing, and this is kind of interesting to me, but this is the pragmatic. And this is where the AIC is actually working against the sixth need. I think the sixth need is maybe the biggest one. The demand for experienced agile coaches and trainers is growing way faster than supply can fill. And all of our current agile methods are old school. I'm sorry, they're almost all old school. Certainly all the certified ones. They're all, you go to a classroom. They think it's exciting that they put exercises in, like the penny game. I mean, great, that's good. But nobody's using scale learning, flipped classroom styles. I mean, these are things that are at least a decade old, maybe 2 decades old. And I believe the biggest thing we have to have now is effective economical distributed training. I'm in the middle of teaching what I call adopting flex, which is actually how do you go into a client, see what's going on, and create a tailored, large-scale approach for them. And it's a 3-day course if I do it in person, and it's a 3-month course, about 2-3 hours a week, doing it online. And I actually think the online course is better than the on-site course because I'm using modern training methods. None I created. I mean, I throw in some wrinkles on some things. But again, see, this is not maximizing my money per student, but I'm not trying to maximize my money per student. And I like money, believe me. My wife sums it up. She was singing Hell on Heels by the Pistolantes, and she says, I'm going to break 1,000,000 hearts is one of the lines. We've been married 30 years, so I'm not worried about her breaking my heart. But I joked to her, I said, I hope you're not going to break my heart. And she says, I may break your bank account, but I'm not going to break your heart. So the thing is, she likes money. I like money. I like going after that. But what I'm trying to do is say, let's make money by solving the problem that millions of people need training, not thousands, not hundreds of thousands. And you have to set it up and recognize there's an infinite need for all intents and purposes. And what you need to be going after is how do you educate the broad masses? And we don't see this happening. And that's actually one of my big commitments. That's why I've made a huge investment. Yeah, and I mean big. I'm talking probably on just the online stuff, probably well more than $500,000 invested in this, because it's not the technology of getting it on Thinkific or anything like that. It's how can you make it so it's interactive so people can work? How do they, like in our class, we have exercises between other people in the class. We have discussion groups. We have exercises between the coaches and their own people they're working. And then there's, of course, interactions with me. But I don't do any lecturing. I have recordings of all this stuff and that they watch. And then it's like, wouldn't it be useful if you've been in a class, if they had videotaped all those lectures that they had you sit through, so then later when you forgot what was said, you could just watch it? Wouldn't that be a good idea? I mean, to me, that's like if you're trying to add value, of course you would do that. But does anybody do that? No, because you want them to have to recertify, take a new class, instead of saying, hey, why don't you just watch this 2 hours of videos? That's all that changed from the last version. And, you're good. Because I don't make $3,000 doing that. So that's where the AIC is coming in. And sorry, I'm starting to get on my soapbox. If I haven't been, I'm getting there now, I can tell. So,
well, we've been at this for a while. Why don't you tell us, to sort of wrap things, how does Flex solve this problem?
Okay. Well, actually, it took me a long time to get here. And I got here by looking at what I did what my company's done over the last 14 years. And how do I make it explicit? And how do I take the scientific approach? But now, once I'm here, it's like not that complicated, actually. The first thing is, what are you trying to do? Well, you could look at it 2 different ways. I mean, one is you could say, well, I'm really going to say, what's the purpose of the organization and their people? Can we be doing something that's productive? That's what companies should be doing and having people get accomplished. Well, to do that, we have to achieve business agility. We have to be able to deliver value quickly. And in an age of uncertainty, we have to be able to pivot. Okay. So I think those are the cornerstones of Flex, is that you're trying to add value to your customers. You're trying to do it in a way where people can contribute. And that the way Flex does it, it says, look, there are laws of software development. Flow, like Reinertsen's book. I mean, he lays out all the ones I know anyway. And I don't know if I know any that's not in that book. So we're going to follow those laws. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at the value stream. I take a picture of what I call the ideal value stream, the value stream of the effective organization. I understand my strategies based on what the customer needs, my portfolio, my product management. I want my teams working in a network manner where they're mostly autonomous, but they're they're working, in a self-organizing way, and that takes management to set that up. So I've got my mid-management setting that up so they could take these inputs, these minimum business increments, as we call them, and swarm around them and get them done, and then give them to release and, with ops and stuff and to the customer. And we're going to do this in little pieces with feedback. And what we do then is we start out visualizing what that is. And it's pretty clear. I'll admit, I was actually surprised when I discovered this myself 10 years ago, that most organizations want to be doing that, but they need to accomplish it in different ways. But I was really surprised when I started realizing if I explained this to practitioners, they all agreed, yeah, that's what we want to do. So what do? Well, now ask them what's in your way. What challenges are you having? And it's not hard for them to know what their challenges are. And there are about 20 challenges that most companies have. So we go through those 20 challenges and say, which ones do you have? And I've been doing this for 20 plus years. So I got this big toolbox for most all the challenges. They're not my toolbox. I take tools from other people. I mean, if you look around, there are lots of smart people, and I got hundreds of tools. And I organize them like, well, here's Scrum's a tool, here's Kanban's a tool, Lean Team Agility is a tool, things like that. And I've got this top drawer that has my starting tools. And then I've got whole chests where it's just drawer after drawer of drawer of others. But I don't need to go there until I need them. So I've got this way of, go like picture a car place where they have thousands of tools, but the main tools are on the top. So it's simple, but you can go in and get the special tool when you need. So now we look at what challenges are solved by what tools. Great. That's your process. These are the things you do. And they're all tied together because you're looking at the relationships between them in the value stream. And also because there are similarities. There are about 20 things, about usually 10 you have to look at. And, like, how do you do product management? How do the teams get organized into trains? How do the teams in the trains work with each other? And you now have basically a customized approach, a tailored approach of existing patterns that people can start with. Now, what's cool about this is you're, first of all, starting with something that's not a bad guess. It's a guess. You don't know for a fact. But you've given them a solution, but you've also explained to them why that solution is there. So they now understand the thought process. They may not be facile enough to do it themselves, but they understand why this was decided, so that if it works, awesome. And if it doesn't work, they know what to look for as to why it's not working. So you're actually training people by example of how to do things instead of expecting them to do it themselves. And that's basically what Flux is. And my experience is it takes about 3 days to teach the system, and then it takes about 2 days to teach all the options. And the way I've got it now is the first 3-day course is either on site or online. And the 2-day course is really just an online course. You just take it to learn, well, here are 4 different ways for a team to figure out how to swarm on the work. Do they just pull it? Do they do dynamic mobbing? I mean, I got a half a dozen ways. So that you just want this like an encyclopedia. I got this problem. What are the solutions to it? Like you look in a car mechanic's guide. And then you now have an approach that's pretty well defined. And it's not mechanical. You have to know things can change, but it gives you what to look at. Like, hey, don't drive against traffic, idiot. Drive with traffic. Shouldn't say idiot, but you know what I'm saying. It's not as complicated. Well, let me put it this way. It is figuring out how to have done it is damn complicated. It is taking me probably, when I look back on it, I would say this probably cost me $2 million just figuring it out, trying things, failing over the last few years, because I have failed. I have tried this. This is like about the third attempt at building something. My first one was too flexible, and it would work sometimes and it wouldn't work sometimes, depending on the culture. So then I learned more about attending to culture and how you do it. But now that it's designed, it's like, oh, it makes sense. And see, this is what true elegance is. See, people talk about simple. I don't go for simple. I go for elegant. Now, if it's elegant, it's going to be as simple as it can be. But if you go for simple, you usually end up on the wrong side of complexity. I don't know. Somebody once said this, had this great quote. I don't give anything about simple on this side of complexity, but I'd give my soul or something for simple on the other side of complexity. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes. I'm just looking at it in Google. And that's brilliant. So when you go after simple, the problem is you might be on the wrong side of complexity, meaning it's too simple. Elegance is actually, in my opinion, solving problems before people understood they had a problem. That's elegance. That's what I'm going after. And figuring that out takes a huge amount of effort. Fortunately, there are dozens, hundreds, well, there are thousands, but I don't know them. I know dozens, at least hundreds of other smart people who have been working on this, and as a community. So this is not me. I haven't figured this out. I've been working with lots of other people to figure this out. And I go to conferences. I'm going to the Agile conference next week, and I'll be spending 90% of my time out in the hallways talking to about 20 different people who are trying to figure this stuff out. And I think that's the encouraging thing, is there are a lot of smart people now who have figured out different aspects of it. Flex is only different in that I've spent more time writing it up than I'm the one who's figured it out. I think the writing it up is very important and kind of difficult.
So as sort of a way to take us out at this point, let's come back to the idea that Flex is a hypothesis to solve, that it is a solution, right?
Yeah, it's an hypothesis of the best way to improve product development that has a software component.
Why is it a hypothesis?
Because I don't know it's the best way. I just think it is. It's a scientific approach. I mean, so I'm telling you do this, but maybe you've got a better idea. Well, let's try it and see what you saw. So I do believe it's the best way. Absolutely. I think it's the best way.
The whole idea of it being a hypothesis, and that there is a mechanism to think about whether or not something contextually works at any point, I think that is just absolutely refreshing. Al, we could probably go on for hours. I certainly wish I was going to be or over at the Agile conference to have one of those hallway conversations.
So if you're hearing this and it's after the Agile conference, go look for my talk on third generation of Agile, and I'm going to be talking about these things there.
Excellent. So Al, we've talked about Flex. Is there anything else that you'd actually like to promote? This has been educational. Is there a sales pitch to wrap this one up?
Well, yes, and an education at the same time. So if you want to learn more about Flex, go to portal.netobjectives.com and you'll see Flex on the front screen, and just drill down there and see the book, or talk to me, send me an email. I am putting out, since I think it's the best way, not just because it's my opinion, because there's evidence it works, that what I'm trying to do is just educate people on what's the best way to do things. And if you start learning what's the best way to do things, I trust you're going to want to work with our stuff, because right now I don't see other approaches that are doing this. But basically, it's not just Flex like an Agile at scale. We incorporate technical training, acceptance, test-driven development, management, because again, it's a system. You need to deal with the organization as a whole. So if you have interest, let me know. I'll be happy to point out, tell me what some of your challenges are. I'll be happy to point out where you can look for basically free reading. I also personally give a lot of free consultations where I just talk about stuff. Because if I can understand your problem and I could point you in the right direction, then, well, that right direction may be me. The right direction may be somebody else. And my attitude is, if it's me, then maybe I'll get business. If it's somebody else, then I've helped you. But overall, I do well enough with that model. And that's basically how I've worked for 20 years. So, yeah, we have a lot of solutions. Be happy to point you to some useful stuff that whether you come with us or not, I think you'll get an education. But I think you'll probably find we do some good things for you as well. So that's what I do.
Al Shalloway, thank you for coming on to and taking the listeners through really a very deep education this afternoon. And yeah, I want to thank you for being on the Software Process and Measurement Cast again. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Tom. I always like talking to you. Appreciate it.
As you're enjoying these walks in the past, consider buying a copy of Mastering Work Intake by Jeremy Willits and Tom Keck. You can buy that at J. Ross Publishing or at Amazon. Links in the show notes. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?